the HTC U11 Plus and the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. Between the two, a lot of fanfare was made about the Galaxy S9 Plus and its capabilities. Well, it's got the first ever dual aperture camera, a snappy new Exynos 9810 processor, well, at least outside of the US, and pretty much the poster boy for Android in terms of a high-end consumer phone. The HTC U11 Plus, on the other hand, though, is what some may consider one of the company's dying last-ditch efforts to play in the smartphone game, and of course hasn't really received as much coverage as the former. So I've owned both devices for more than a month now. I've had the U11 Plus since February and the S9 Plus since March. As such, I've ended up using both phones for about a month each, and I'm here to tell you about my findings for both phones, with some few honestly surprising twists as well. Don't get me wrong though, they're really both good phones, but after using them for a substantial amount of time, I think that the U11 Plus can really do things that I consider important in a smartphone these days better. Let's start with the exterior. Both phones feature a new 18:9 and above aspect ratio display and some IP68 water and dust resistant rating. But design-wise, the U11 Plus isn't really putting up much of a fight beside the S9 Plus. Despite the U11 Plus being a wider device, the edge-to-edge display on the Samsung phone is bigger at 6.2 inches versus 6.0. It's an AMOLED display, and because of that, it's much easier to read under harsh sunlight, so that's one point won over the U11 Plus. I've gotta say that I'm just a little bit disillusioned over AMOLED displays. Yes, they've got nice colors and viewing angles and deep blacks and all that, but my Samsung phones of past have all exhibited burn-in the year or so of ownership. The S9 Plus of course has its trademark edge display, but I'll get to this at a later part. Both phones have stereo speakers with a main bottom firing speaker and an earpiece that doubles as the second speaker. They're both equally as loud, but I found that I liked HTC's speakers just a little bit more in these cases, as they sounded a little bit more fuller and louder as well. Speaking of music though, I think you guys know where I am going to go with this. This is where the S9 Plus will win hands down every single time. The headphone jack. You guys might feel very differently about this, but while wireless headphones may be the future, having a 3.5mm headphone jack really is better for convenience and that plug and play factor. You see, when I'm moving around, I'm not always carrying a dongle with me. I don't always have access to a wireless headphone. They don't have unlimited batteries, and not everyone has a USB-C headphone for me to loan as well. Case in point, when I had to have an impromptu stay over at a friend's house and when I wanted to borrow a pair of headphones to listen to some YouTube without bothering anybody, I couldn't do any of that. So that idea had to be scrapped so quickly. Couple that with the fact that at times you can't interchange USB-C headphones between manufacturers due to implementation differences, and you're in for a frustrating time, as for example something that would work on the Pixel 2 will not work on the U11 Plus. Maybe it'll get better one day, but as of right now, I'd very much like to see my phones to come with a 3.5mm headphone jack. Let's move on to the final thing that I'd like to touch on before we head into software. The fingerprint sensor. Because you touch the fingerprint. Yeah, okay, never mind.
Samsung has learned from their mistakes of past, and now the S9 has a fingerprint sensor mounted below the camera. And okay, this is a minor gripe of mine, but I don't put any passwords or locks on my phone, and touching the fingerprint sensor on the S9 doesn't wake up my phone, whereas it does on the U11 Plus. Of course, I just learned to wake the screen instead by pressing on the virtual home button, and yeah. Moving on to the software side of things, and both HTC and Samsung have gotten a lot more linear in their approaches to Android, though they still couldn't be any more different. Samsung Experience 9 is a feature-rich spin on Android and is a massive improvement over TouchWiz, while HTC's new Sense UI more closely resembles stock Android, more than any other HTC phone in the past at least. Samsung's bloat comes in the form of a lot of in-house apps, though I would argue that majority of them are actually useful. And this time around, it is HTC that I have gripes with when it comes to bloatware like Viveport, Under Armour Record, and HTC Sense Companion and News Republic, of which the last two are particularly irritating as they keep sending you push notifications. Luckily, the apps can be disabled altogether, but it's not something I'd like to see in a flagship device. Speaking of in-house apps then, HTC's built-in dialer, contacts, clock, messaging apps all look pretty archaic and dated in comparison to Samsung's constantly updating and evolving one. So that's a big win for Samsung there. Despite having a newer, faster single-threaded performance advanced processor though, the Exynos 9810 on the S9 Plus felt slower and a bit more sluggish. That's where HTC won big for me. I'll start off by saying that I started off using the U11 Plus for a month and I found it to be an incredibly smooth and bug-free experience. And when I moved to the S9 Plus, things didn't turn out as silky. I'm not sure if it's an Exynos variant thing, mind you, but the S9 Plus had noticeably more delays, was slower in launching and multitasking in between apps, and even things like sharing and waiting for the keyboard to pop up to type was slower on the S9. Pretty strange considering that we are pitting the newer, more powerful Exynos 9810 against an older Snapdragon 835. By themselves, these slowdowns might be inconsequential, but when you're wanting to go fast and your actions per minute are on the high side of things, you inevitably find yourself waiting for the phone to keep up with your demands. This, however, could just be the nature of comparing a phone running Samsung Experience as opposed to near stock Android. Speaking of multitasking, I experienced a really irritating issue whenever I tried to use split screen on the S9 Plus with YouTube.
It's very similar to the edges and overall does not feel like a cheap, flimsy plastic, more a higher quality polycarb. It gives off a great first week.
Splitting the screen then maximizing it back again would consistently lock up the phone and crash the UI, making it incredibly irritating and frustrating to use. So I brought the issue up with Samsung and they proceeded to ask me to do a factory reset on the device, which admittedly fixed the issue as well as sped up the phone just a little bit, but it still affected my out-of-the-box impressions of it, as I imagine it would for many people as well. Nevertheless, the issue is resolved, but it's something to keep in mind about Samsung software. It's not all bad for Samsung software though. I mean, they do win in a couple of things. For starters, my U11 Plus has only received one update since purchasing it, and it is still stuck on the 1st of December 2017 security patch update, whereas the S9 Plus has now received 3 to 4 and is on the 1st of May security patch. So it goes without saying then that security patches is extremely important. So this is a really big shame on you for HTC. This also leads to a very concerning issue of support for HTC devices. Not only is the phone not receiving any security updates since December, but promised features that would come like an update for HDR10 is nowhere to be seen, and while HTC does mention support for VoLTE connection on their website, I did not get any of it on any of my carriers here. With that, we segue into cellular connectivity, where it is kind of a trade-off between the two, where I consistently found that I got stronger network signal on the U11 Plus. This helps tremendously when I'm receiving SMSs or calls from my bank or services, as I'm located further away from any network towers. Using the U11 Plus meant that I could still get them in my room, whereas it would be a hit or miss on the S9 Plus until I brought it out onto the balcony. But we come back to this again, where the S9 Plus wins is in VoLTE. As mentioned before, the U11 Plus simply doesn't have any. It might be possible for it to receive support for VoLTE through a software update. Whether that happens or not, of course, is anyone's guess. Both phones have a way to quickly launch applications and tasks, and here it is another big win for Samsung's Edge screen software. This is something that I've very much gotten used to on Samsung phones, as it is a super convenient way to quickly take a screenshot, capture selected parts of the screen, extract text, quickly access your most used apps, etc, etc, etc. HTC has something similar known as the Edge Launcher, but there's no real quick and easy way to launch it. I have mine set to a long squeeze of the phone, and while it's still not too bad, it's still not as fast as the Edge panel on Samsung's devices. It also doesn't have as many quick features and tools as Edge screen, so that's a point for Sam. Well, now hold on a minute. I found the S9 Plus's Edge to be a bit of a double-edged sword. Pardon the pun. It looks nice aesthetically, but something that I found not to be an issue on the U11 Plus turned out to be an annoyance on the S9 Plus. Doing full horizontal screenshots and reordering YouTube playlists aren't issues you talk about when using the U11 Plus, but the same can't be said for the S9 Plus, where I had difficulty trying to select from Edge to Edge due to the Edge, and trying to reorder a watch later playlist as the handle is located on the Edge, making it worse if you are rocking a case. The squeezing function on the U11 Plus is not all bad though. Here's where it takes another big win for me. It is just really so much faster to launch the camera by squeezing the phone than trying to reposition to double tap the power button or waking the phone, then swiping up to launch the camera, as squeezing is really something you can do really quickly without having to search for buttons or waiting for the screen to swipe up. Now then is perhaps a good time to talk about differences in camera quality then. In theory, this should be a no-brainer, right? I mean, after all, the S9 Plus has been rated as this top-tier mobile photography device with its dual aperture camera system and additional zoom lens. So something like the U11 Plus shouldn't be able to come close to competing with it, right? Well, no, I found the answer to be not so clear-cut. See, for those of you who might not know, the U11 Plus was once one of the contenders to being the Pixel 2 XL, codenamed Muskie. Because of that, the U11 Plus has a lot in common with the Pixel 2 XL, with there even being a slight edge to the U11 Plus, as it has a larger f1.7 aperture as opposed to the f1.8 on the Pixel 2 XL. So now that all sounds freaking awesome, right? It should then, in theory, perform better than a Pixel 2 XL, right? Well, the truth is that while the HTC built-in camera app is good enough, it can't really hold much of a competition against the Pixel 2 XL and the Juggernaut's machine learning algorithm-fed camera. There is, of course, a silver lining to this though, as on XDA there are many ports out there for the Pixel 2 XL's camera app, and I can say that they work wonders on the U11 Plus. As such, this segment will cover more on the differences than on the S9 Plus with the stock Samsung app and the U11 Plus running the Google camera app, specifically builds made by Arnova. Well, you might think that that's just a bit unfair as it's not really apples to apples, but I think it is. Samsung's stock app is really good enough as it is, and nothing can take advantage of that hardware except the stock app, while the U11 Plus presents more of an untapped potential kind of scenario, and I'm just trying to bring that out as best as I can. Onto photography then. In daylight samples, both phones were neck to neck, though I noticed that photos on the Samsung had more often than not more true to scene colors and had better dynamic range. Sometimes the U11 Plus with the Google camera would churn out a better, more pleasing image, but in most cases, it would lose out. Where the S9 Plus loses, however, and I feel that it's in a pretty big way, is in processing. I mean, come on, just look at this image and you can see just how heavy-handed the processing is. Because of this, it also loses out in the sharpness department. Colors might just be a bit too saturated for me as well, where the U11 Plus would just come out looking a bit dull, so there's no good balance in between, unfortunately. Sometimes though, they're just about the same, though not necessarily in a good way, like in this sample, where both phones have turned the pinks and red in this red ginger flower into a searing, clipping hot pink, eliminating all details in the process. Where the S9 Plus wins again is in the autofocusing systems. Although both phones carry a dual pixel face detection autofocus sensor, (PDAF), getting the correct autofocus on the U11 Plus was a bit of a chore, where the S9 Plus would just handle it flawlessly. I also observed that the U11 Plus was very prone to lens flaring, especially in scenes with very bright light sources, either head-on where you'd notice the lens flare, or at an angle where a portion of the image would look quite washed out, which could be indicative of the quality of the lenses used in the U11 Plus. Here's where it gets interesting again. As soon as the scene hit a bit darker and rainier, the S9 Plus would more often than not look a lot colder and the U11 Plus would look warmer, with the U11 Plus looking more true to life. Now, this observation doesn't always happen, but if in daylight, the S9 Plus wins maybe about 80% of the time, where in situations with less light, the U11 Plus would take that 80% lead. The U11 Plus, however, has a large tendency to have underexposed, crushed blacks. Another interesting fact is that it didn't take 100 lux and below for the S9 Plus's f1.5 aperture camera to kick in. No, pretty much every image you see taken here in this slightly overcast, cloudier day was taken in the S9 Plus's f1.5 aperture automatically. Now, this would normally be a good thing, but I found that the output of these images were really soft and the details were pretty much non-existent as well, making it a big issue. I mean, again, take a look at some of these samples. In this particular picture, we can see that Samsung's noise filtering algorithm has totally butchered any and all detail in this plant, and I am utterly disappointed by this. Why? Well, because it is possible to fix color and balancing of an image, but lost details are going to remain lost forever. Going indoors, where again things got even darker, is where we see limitations of the HDR Plus on the U11 Plus. The output was still able to match that of the S9 Plus's f1.5 aperture, but at the cost of a grainier image. If your hands can hold still well enough though, you can enable HDR Plus Enhanced, and once again the tables are turned and the U11 Plus comes out with an extremely clean image and, possibly sharp, provided you're able to hold still for long enough. Alright, let's do what DCEU does best and go even darker, this time with either full night or twilight photography. Here lies the decision that you'll have to make. Do you want to have a fast shutter speed at the cost of a lower quality image, or do you want to take the chance with HDR Plus Enhanced and try holding still for say a second or two? Depending on which you choose, you could either end up with an overly denoised, darker, passable image on the S9 Plus, or you could end up with a nice well-lit photo that could potentially be blurred due to shaky hands on the U11 Plus. So I'm willing to bet that many will go for the sharper albeit lower quality image, but hear me out. If you've got a patience and a steady hand, the rewards are a more detail-rich, well-lit photo with better colors and dynamic range, and I think that much of a possibility is pretty much worth it. Moving into video samples, prior to giving the phone a factory reset, I was getting a really bad issue on the S9 Plus, where the footage that I was taking would jitter for the first few seconds, making the videos really hard to use, especially if you're trying to do some ad-lib videography work. Thankfully though, after the factory reset, this issue has since disappeared, so here it is compared to the U11 Plus, both in 4K.
Alright, so now I've got both phones in both hands, just to see how they handle in stability and perhaps both quality. So you can have a listen, and oops, there is a dog that is kind of chasing after me. It's a stray dog, but it seems to be a very playful dog.
Video footage on the S9 Plus is way more stable, but due to video stabilization, it exhibits some wobble effect that is noticeable, and even though the footage is in 4K, it really doesn't look all that sharp for some reason. The U11 Plus has a more shakier video on the other hand, but the details in 4K seems to be much better preserved in comparison. In terms of audio quality though, I prefer that of the S9 Plus, though you could always revert back to the stock HTC app for recording, as it does sound a little bit better. Yeah, I don't really like taking selfies, so, put up with my unphotogenic mug here for a while. But comparing the two, again, is a very give and take scenario. Selfies on a really bright background on the S9 Plus caused my face to come out just a little bit washed out, and while the U11 Plus was really clear and sharp in comparison, the HDR effects and contrast might just be a little bit too strong for my liking. On a more evenly lit background, I'll have to give the win to the U11 Plus, as photos looked a lot more crisp with more details. Heck, you could even probably zoom in and see the pores on my face. And finally, with portrait mode, I think both phones did very well here at blurring the background, though the U11 Plus is definitely sharper and more detail rich here. This might work counterintuitively however, as it seems to stick out of the image very much so, though I suppose that it depends on which you prefer. Now, using the cameras take up a lot of power, and all that sensor and optics and technological prowess doesn't really matter if a phone is out of juice. So how well do these two perform neck and neck? Well, this department is one of the main reasons why I would choose the U11 Plus over the S9 Plus. In my 1 month of testing each phone, the S9 Plus only lasted as long as my S7 Edge, passed with about 8 to 9 hours of total use, with 3.5 to 4.5 hours of screen on time maximum. This is where it gets a bit strange, and I don't know why some other media outlets are getting different numbers though, but in my use, the U11 Plus blasted much further ahead, with total usage time going from, let's say, 13 to 20 hours, with total screen on time between 6 and 8 hours. This effectively meant that using the U11 Plus was akin to using the S9 Plus twice. Now, I'm not sure if the numbers that I got for the S9 Plus were lower because of the differences between the Exynos and Snapdragon variant, but even on battery sizes alone, the U11 Plus isn't really all that much bigger to justify the double endurance at 3930 mAh versus 3500 mAh. I think this is more of a testament to the leanness of a near-stock Android experience and the benefits that it brings, and also maybe to do with the Exynos 9810, as I really have not heard flattering things about this processor. For those of you who are wondering as well, this is with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth always turned on, GPS and location always turned on, and constant usage of YouTube, Facebook, WhatsApp and Waze for navigation. By now you're hearing a lot of good things about the U11 Plus from me, so much so that you're maybe about to shout, "Oh my god, you're such a HTC fanboy, you're biased and you're a shill," or maybe "HTC paid for this video." Well, no, hold on a minute here. The reason I got to test each phone for a month each is because this is actually my second U11 Plus. Back in January when I first got the phone, I ended up using it for a month before the S9 Plus came out, and I got itchy and I decided to try that out instead. During that time, despite being a claimed IP68 water resistant, water managed to seep into the bottom of my U11 Plus. I'm not really sure how, given that I didn't exactly fire it up with a water jet or submerge it, and I ended up having to send it back to the service center to claim warranty on it. And that process took an entire whole month, of which I got to spend an ample amount of time with the S9 Plus as my daily driver. As a matter of fact, my first U11 Plus exhibited very significant backlight bleeding, and even this second U11 Plus has managed to get itself water compromised, though fortunately I was able to recover it in a basin of rice and silica gel. Yeah, so I would like to add as well that I treated the U11 Plus no differently from how I treated the S9 Plus, and the S9 Plus is still going strong and watertight. Watching Jerry Rig Everything's videos about the U11 and the U12 Plus further reinforces this concern about HTC's build quality, being that maybe they're not as good as they used to be. In a perfect world, then I would pick the U11 Plus due to its spectacular battery life and what I deem to be a better camera experience given a bit of tinkering, but the reality is that both phones have kind of let me down in different ways. You see, I like the U11 Plus a lot with its great battery life, smooth performance and pixel-light camera, but the lack of software updates, broken promises and missing claimed features together with the massive questioning of build quality have really hampered my impressions of it. On the other hand though, with the S9 Plus, it's really nice to have things like the headphone jack again, and it's really one of the best built Android smartphones, but the battery life really leaves more to be desired. The software feels heavy after tasting what a near stock Android experience is capable of, and the camera experience really doesn't live up to its expectations. In the end though, I think I'll stick with the U11 Plus for just a little while longer, while I explore other options.
I hope you guys liked long ass videos, because that's exactly what this was, but it's one that I wanted to make as it really detailed down my experiences with both phones. So yeah, that's it for this comparison. Let me know what you guys feel about it. What kind of phone are you using as well, and what is it exactly that you like about your current phone, and maybe what is it about a phone that is important to you? Let me know in the comment section down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Give it a like if you liked it, make sure you're subscribed, click the bell icon to get notified, and I will see you guys around.
Doesn't allow me to do anything. Go!